Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to give folks another minute or so to trickle in, and then we'll get started. Okay, we're going to get started. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. I'm Lindsay Owens. I'm the Executive Director of Groundwork Collaborative. And you are in the right place if you are here for our webinar entitled An Unaffordable Bill, How the GOP Economic Policy is Raising Prices. We did not hide the ball with this title. We are going to spend today talking about how the recently passed Republican budget bill raises prices on everything from food and groceries to energy to student loans to healthcare. As you may well be aware of, the top concern for Americans right now when it comes to the economy is the rising cost of living. And the Republican economic agenda, by and large, is making that worse. On the administrative side, with Trump's tariffs, and now the signature legislative achievement, the Republican budget bill, which will be just a huge problem for Americans when it comes to cost of living. So we're going to walk through all the ways in which this is true and give you plenty of data to use as you go out and talk to the folks who you communicate with, whether that's the public, whether that's members of Congress. And we have a great panel of experts here today to do it, as well as some folks from the Hill, some leadership staff we will get to hear from as well. But before I introduce everyone and kick off the panel, I want to quickly run through a couple of slides from recent polling and messaging that Groundwork has conducted or pulled from other partners who've conducted to help really lay out this case. Great. Looking back historically, all the way to Trump's first term, there was something really thorny about how Americans really trusted Trump on the economy. Even as his overall approval rating plummeted and soured across the first term, he still got high marks on the economy. So there were people who felt like he was not a great president, but were sort of begrudgingly admitting that they thought he was not so bad when it came to managing the economy. That is shifting now. And we see Trump's approval rating declining again. But this time, his marks on the economy are actually lower than his overall approval rating, in line or lower, depending on the poll that you look at. So this is a really interesting turn of events. And what we're seeing is that his past strength on the economy is now becoming his Achilles heel and a real liability. And there is one very, very, very specific reason for that, and it is prices. President Trump's lowest marks by far are around his handling of inflation and prices. So I love this slide right here. Everyone should take a look. This is a very recent YouGov poll that was actually done July 14th, the latest data point here. And what you can see is since Trump took office, his approval rating on handling of major issues, crime, immigration, jobs in the economy, foreign policy, inflation and prices, they've all deteriorated. But by far the biggest deterioration and the lowest marks go to inflation and prices. You'll see sort of general handling of the economy is also low at about -12 net support, but inflation and prices at -26. So that's the backdrop with which we should be thinking about communicating the impacts of the Republican budget bill, that really leaning into the Achilles heel, twisting the knife, if you will, as we continue our messaging. And I think what we know now that the budget bill has passed about how the public views the budget bill is that by and large, they're viewing it negatively. 51% of voters view the bill unfavorably. But what we also know is that our ceiling here is much higher. And you'll see on this slide here, actually, that there are some critical constituencies who actually are still undecided on this bill. So 29% of independents in particular, even 10% of Democrats, and 25% of non-MAGA Republicans. So what this says to me is that actually now is the time to really pick up and increase our communications and outreach efforts because we have room to run. Similarly, the reason we have room to run, of course, is that not everyone has heard about this bill. So there's increasing need to get out the word, and there's room for awareness of the bill to grow. And in general, as people become aware of this bill, they sour on it. So it's really important that we do this work now. You'll see here, actually, more than half of independents have heard little or nothing about the Republican budget bill. So really, the challenge and the opportunity is that we have a much higher ceiling on awareness and favorability. Okay, just quickly, there was a call this morning with the Center for American Progress, and Colin over there made this really astute point, which is that we're watching in real time Republicans try to reframe this bill as a pro-working class bill, a bill that offers tax cuts for the working class. And the tip of the spear of that argument is a policy that was passed in the bill to eliminate taxes on tips and to a lesser extent taxes on overtime. Groundwork just conducted some polling on this. I think this is really important, so we wanted to share it with you, and it's hot off the presses. In general, that policy of eliminating tax on tips and overtime wages is very popular. As you'll see here from this slide, net support for that policy is at plus 49%. We wanted to test some messages that erode that base of support. And we were able to actually test two messages that really drive down support. As you see here, message A drives down net support from 49% to 14%. Message B drives down net support from 49% to 12%. So they both work approximately equally well. The first message, and I'll just go to the next slide here, is that is emphasizing the fact that the tips and overtime tax breaks are temporary, expiring in 2028, but the tax breaks for the wealthy are permanent. And emphasizing that contrast and the unfairness of that contrast works really nicely. The second message emphasizes that very few workers get benefits from the proposals because very few workers work for tips or receive overtime pay, and also that concomitantly, the other proposals in the bill, like the proposals that erode SNAP benefits and Medicaid benefits, hit those same workers. And so the net effect is that those workers are far more hurt by cuts to Medicaid and SNAP than they benefit from overtime, no taxes on overtime and tips. And so that message also does really well. I mean, I think our takeaway here is that we have really strong responses for this. And we should use them, whichever you choose. They work about equally well. Okay, one quick point on tariffs, and then I'm going to move into some additional recent message testing and then kick off the panel. Trump's tariffs are incredibly underwater. More than 60% of Americans oppose new tariffs on imported goods. About 80% of Americans want to see the tariff pause extended. Again, this is a policy that Americans view as raising prices. It's also a policy that continues to drive news cycles. And we'll see that again on August 1st when we hit yet another one of Trump's self-imposed deadlines for his tariffs. I really want to encourage you to use the news cycle around tariffs to also tell a story about the impacts of the Republican budget bill. When you have a chance to talk about rising prices with tariffs, in the same breath, you can go to a message about rising prices because of the Republican budget bill. And so I think not just waiting for stories about the budget bill, but also seizing the opportunity to communicate the Republican budget bill in the context of the tariffs with a kind of 1-2 punch. We've seen in message testing over and over and over again that one of the strongest messages we have is the kind of double whammy or 1-2 punch message, where you combine a story about rising prices from tariffs with rising prices from the Republican budget bill. With that, I'm just going to flip forward really quickly here to Grow Progress message test. We wanted to look at both which messages persuaded people to find the Republican budget bill unfavorable, but we also wanted to see which messages actually started to weaken Trump's support for handling of the economy. Going back to the first, one of the first slides I mentioned, where historically Trump has had sort of high marks on how he manages the economy. Can we use this Republican budget bill to weaken that advantage further and further and further? And so we tested a few different specific costs: healthcare, groceries, higher education, and we tested tariffs again, combining tariffs with the Republican budget bill. And what we found is messaging on all 4 of those topics does exactly what we wanted it to do, which is drive down trust in both the president and congressional Republicans in their handling of the economy broadly. Healthcare and tariffs did a little bit better, but all 4 did quite well. And finally, just a very quick, public service announcement. Wanted to show a map really quickly. This is a map of a local media blitz that the Groundwork Collaborative just finished, just to give you a sense of how much appetite there is in local media right now for talking about the impacts of this bill, how they're going to affect people in different states, how many Medicaid recipients will be at risk, how many people who use the ACA will be at risk, how many people who use SNAP will be at risk, how many rural hospitals will be at risk, how many nursing homes will be at risk. In the 13 days immediately following the passage of the Big Beautiful Bill, the Groundwork team was actually able to do 83 local television and radio interviews on the impacts of this bill. And those 83 interviews, we were able to get to media markets in 48 of the 50 states. So I think the appetite is huge. We have an opportunity to really surge our communications and messaging, and would really encourage everyone who has the ability to do so. Okay, I breezed through that, and I think I stayed right on my 10-minute mark. And so with that, we're going to turn it over to the incredible panel. So let me quickly introduce who we have for you today. We have Andrea Dukas, who is the Vice President of Health Policy at the Center for American Progress. CAP has just been putting out incredible research and messaging on the impacts of this bill on healthcare. We also have Ed Bolin, who is the Director of SNAP State Strategies at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. The Center on Budget has also just been doing incredible research on the impacts of this bill, so that we all have the latest impacts by state. We also have Charles Hua, who's the founder and executive director of Power Lines. And I'm so glad he's joining us today, because I think the impacts of this bill on energy costs, particularly through the summer as folks are seeing their utilities prices increase, is not getting nearly enough attention. And I'm really excited that he's here joining us to make this case today. And then we also have Aisa Conchala Banez from the Student Borrower Protection Center, policy director and former Hill staffer, who's going to talk about the effects of this bill on college students, folks with student loans. So with that, I'm going to kick off the panel. I'm going to actually start by letting all of the panelists take a whack at what I believe is one of the most infuriating pieces of misinformation about this bill, which is that the effects of this bill won't be seen for years and years and years to come. So if you're in the public and you're worried about this bill, you don't need to be worried, because you've got years before these policies take effect. That is really a misrepresentation. The bill's harms are not years off into the future. They will start today. And so with that, my question is, what impacts of this new bill will we start to see first? And how will these harms to people's pocketbooks and communities worsen over time? So I think, if it's okay, I will start with Andrea for this one, and then go to Ed, and then Charles, and then Aisa.
Yeah, no, I'd be glad to jump into this. This is a talking point that drives me absolutely insane. So yes, there are a lot of different changes in this bill, in this law, and as a result, right, many of them are going to be experienced over time. But immediately, there are changes that folks on Medicaid or who are qualified for Medicaid, on Medicare, and that have Affordable Care Act coverage are going to experience. So for starters, this is something that's been under covered when it comes to what the harms are of the bill. But there were two rules that were promulgated under the Biden administration that the law stops implementation of immediately. One is a bill or as a rule that makes it easier for people to enroll in Medicaid that are eligible for it, Medicaid and CHIP. So just streamlines enrollment, like doesn't require you to bring your disabled child to an appointment in person, right? Makes it easier to complete paperwork. That rule alone, blocking the implementation is going to cause probably 2 million people to lose their Medicaid coverage or CHIP coverage. Additionally, there's a rule to make it easier for people on Medicare who are very, very, very low income. These are people making less than $20,000 a year, or like a couple making $30,000 a year, from accessing savings programs that help cover their Medicare costs. Right. So overnight, like we're expecting, or the CBO at least is expecting that 1.3 million Medicare beneficiaries are going to see their out-of-pocket costs spike. I mean, and we're talking dramatic spikes, like for a couple making, again, like $30,000 a year, seeing out-of-pocket spikes go like potentially up to over $8,000, which is really dramatic. For the millions of people who buy their coverage through the Affordable Care Act marketplaces, we're going to start to see impacts as soon as November, right? When open enrollment comes around. We're already starting to see, so the way that insurance, just like anybody who gets insurance through their job, right? Every year we go through an open enrollment process. For people who get Affordable Care Act marketplace coverage, they go through open enrollment. Medicare goes through open enrollment. There's a structure that goes into place where actuaries at insurers are trying to figure out what should we price our products at. That will have to do with historical utilization, what's going on in the market, yada, yada, yada. They've already started, insurers and the ACA marketplaces have already started filing their rates. We've seen about a quarter of them increase their premiums by 20% or more because there's just so much volatility that we're anticipating. And on top of that, right, one of the things that this bill did not do, affirmatively did not do, Republicans voted down an amendment that would have done this. They do not extend the enhanced tax credits people get to buy ACA coverage on their own, right? These are working people. In order to qualify for a tax credit, you have to have an income, and it's got to be, like you're working folks. We are expecting that costs, the out-of-pocket costs that people are paying for their premiums are going to go up by an average of 75%, thanks to actual inaction, like determined inaction on this bill. That's going to happen January 1, 2026 for their new products. But people are going to see that in November when they go to enroll, because they're going to see how much more they're going to be paying. And I don't know that they're going to make the connection. I hope they make the connection to the fact that this is a Trump tax or a congressional Republican tax. But we're going to start to see those things happen immediately. There's many other things that are going to start to go into effect next year, but those are just the things that are going to start right now. It's really a shame that we're going to see so many people in this country experience so much harm.
Thanks, Andrea. Ed, do you want to talk a little bit about the impacts on grocery prices and what the timeline is?
Sure, yeah. So thanks for having me. I'll just start with the basics. This is the biggest cut in Snap's history. It's about $187 billion over the next 9 years or so. And it's helpful to keep in mind that like 95, 96% of the Snap cost are benefits in people's pockets. It goes right to their card. They go right to the store. They buy their food for their families. So there's no way to cut $187 billion without taking food away from folks, either by reducing their benefits or by cutting them off the program entirely. So SNAP actually has some pretty dramatic immediate changes in this bill. I know other provisions push things off till after elections or delayed things for various reasons, but actually some of the most significant cuts to SNAP are in effect now, even though states don't know how to do them. So we're hoping there's a little bit of time to figure out how to protect folks that are eligible to keep their benefits. One of the biggest is an expansion of an ineffective work reporting requirement, the work requirement kind of concept that SNAP's had for years for a number of uh, adults who aren't working. They're essentially limited to 3 months of benefits, which means if they're looking for work and it takes 4 or 5 months, they're hungry for those last 2 months. It's never worked to help people get jobs. It only works to cut people off SNAP. And it's being expanded to more folks. It's going to be older Americans who sometimes have health conditions or other challenges to find work, as well as ageism and difficulty in getting jobs. It's also going to be extended for the first time to parents with kids over 14, for 14 and up. So that's a really significant expansion that will result in kids in households with parents who lost their jobs having less food and less financial security while their parents are trying to find work or get retrained or figure out how to provide for their families. So that's really troubling. Millions of folks across the country will be affected, but that's not all that's happening. The bill will force veterans to meet this work requirement, so they will start losing benefits across the country. People experiencing homelessness will now be no longer eligible. They'll be subject to this work requirement, and they'll start losing benefits. And that will affect hundreds of thousands of folks across the country. And that's not all. There's also a change in, so this whole idea of the time limit in SNAP, this 3 month limit is, well, if there's jobs out there, people should be able to get them. Like I said, we know that doesn't work, but that's the rhetoric you hear. But states have always been able to waive that requirement if they can show there's not jobs in an area, if there's high unemployment or other signs of insufficient jobs. So that's been a real safety valve that's affected and protected a lot of people. I have a quick visual that if you want to share at some point, we can take a look at, but they changed the rules around that waiver option. And so you'll see that there's about 21, 22 states that currently have these waivers. Those are areas that are in the yellow on the left-hand side, the map on the left-hand side. Going forward, they're going to lose those waivers. And on the right-hand side, you'll see areas that are eligible under the new rules under this bill, basically nowhere. 10 counties, I think, across the states will have high enough unemployment to qualify. So in those states that you see that shading, and I apologize, but New England has a bunch of those places. It's just their jurisdictions, they're so small, it got a little scrunched. You're going to see people cut off at the time limit immediately. CBO estimates about 1.1 million people across the country. The time that these waivers will end will vary a little bit, but Pennsylvania loses its waiver next month. 7 other states, including like Arizona, Colorado, lose theirs the following month. So it's just going to start dropping people off of the rolls. And I think it's actually sort of incumbent on us to show that impact, because I think that's one of the most dramatic impacts that we'll see. Thanks for the slide. And I'll just mention one last change that's immediate, which is a real restriction for legally present immigrants who were eligible for SNAP. Many of them are no longer eligible. So if someone's a refugee or has asylum status or is a victim of sexual violence, domestic violence, or trafficking, they've all been eligible for SNAP. They will no longer be eligible for SNAP under this rule. So really, really devastating. And for all those folks, they lose their purchasing power. The stores they go to will see cuts to their bottom line, and folks will struggle to put food on the table.
Thanks, Ed. Charles would love to just hear a little bit about what folks can expect on the energy price front.
Absolutely. Well, first, thanks, Lindsay and the Groundwork team for having us. I think the energy affordability crisis is one that historically has not received as much attention to, but even in the last couple of months here, we're seeing significant increase in both national, regional, and local focus on this. Because first, just to take a step back, we are facing a unprecedented energy affordability crisis in America. A lot of folks don't know this even in the energy space, but there are more than 80 million Americans who are struggling to pay their utility bills based on U.S. Census Bureau data. And that means that they're trading off food, education, childcare, healthcare, all of the other expenses that folks have been talking about. And one of the unique things about energy in particular is that if you don't pay your bills, there's a risk that you'll actually get shut off from the system. And if you don't have electricity in this modern economy, of course, there are a lot of things that you can't access, whether it's refrigeration or emergency medicine and things like that. So we had put out some polling earlier this year just showing the depth and the magnitude of this crisis, where roughly 3 in 4 Americans are concerned about utility bills rising this year, and 4 in 5 Americans feel powerless to do anything about it. And there's a very real concern here because electricity prices have increased roughly 30% over the last 4 years. And we also just put out a report a couple weeks ago showing that the utilities have requested $29 billion in rate increases already this year, which is setting a record with 6 months left to go in the year. And when we put that in the context of some of the recent developments around energy, one thing to note is that we are seeing unprecedented increases in electricity demand to this scale that we haven't seen in 3 decades. And when there's a imbalance there in terms of the rising electricity demand and the supply that we have to be able to power that electricity, that is creating challenges around energy affordability and electricity prices. And there's several specific provisions in this bill that have a direct impact, particularly on tax credits. So there's tax credits both on the sort of supply side around solar, wind that were essentially stripped, previously passed under the or extended under the Inflation Reduction Act. But now that timeline for being able to access these credits has been significantly curtailed. The one good thing in terms of what's been preserved on that front is tax credits for other technologies, including storage, geothermal, nuclear, and some other technologies. On the demand side, though, there are a lot of credits, particularly around energy efficiency and rooftop solar, that regular folks could be able to access in a way that they hadn't before. And a lot of those are being phased out, if not, completely eliminated right away. So there's a lot of provisions within this within this package that implicate energy cost. There's been a lot of estimates around what the impact of this bill will have from a dollar standpoint. There's been a lot of analysis from groups like Energy Innovation and Rhodium Group and Princeton University showing that the magnitude of impact here could be on the order of tens of billions of dollars by the end of this decade in terms of cumulative bill increases. The truth is we're not going to know the exact amount until all of this plays out because the energy system is very dynamic right now because of this AI revolution, because of the onshoring of manufacturing, which is creating this spike in electricity demand. And at the same time, we've been seeing different barriers and bottlenecks to the build out of necessary grid and energy infrastructure to be able to accommodate that demand, and that's creating challenges. Just this week, not to get too in the weeds here, but the Mid-Atlantic grid operator known as PJM, which stands for Pennsylvania, Jersey, and Maryland, but it covers much more, anything from Chicago to DC to Baltimore and Philly and everything in between. They announced that the capacity auction prices had increased again from last year, which was already a near 10x increase. So, we have seen this now manifest itself in political campaigns. Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey is talking about PJM, and it's not a good sign if a governor is talking about something as wonky and nerdy as a grid operator. What it does show is that energy affordability is a huge challenge. The pressures have been going up in terms of what's facing our grid and the implications for energy affordability. And on a going forward basis, this is only going to continue to persist, if not significantly worsen as an issue. And it behooves us all to figure out how we can make sure that we actually manage these efforts around energy cost. Because if we don't get this right, then we're not going to be able to actually power our modern economy and make sure that everybody has an opportunity to actually reap the benefits of a lot of these investments.
Thanks so much, Charles. You said.
Thanks so much, Lindsay. I think it's really important to remember also that we can't talk about the changes of this law in a vacuum, right? This law comes at a time when we have families all over the country that are already experiencing such unprecedented economic anxiety and uncertainty. And that includes the many families already struggling to answer the question on how they're going to help their kid pay for college. Fun fact, many families do not think about how they're going to pay for college in a week. These are very long and drawn out and thought out scenarios that many families really grapple over for many months. And actually the FAFSA debt, the beginning dates that families can start filling out the FAFSA for the next academic year is actually this fall. And so with all of the very massive changes of this bill to federal financial aid programs and student loan repayment programs, that all of those changes are making an already very complicated and very difficult conversation even harder. And how does this do that? How does this bill do this? So essentially, families that are already kind of struggling to pay for college are going to have less financial aid options available to them to pay for their higher education. So the bill does this by eliminating certain financial aid programs, specifically the Graduate Plus Loan Program. This is a federal financial financing program that helps students pursue graduate level education, professional level education. Think everything from master's degree, law degrees, to medical and dental degrees. The bill also sets new rigid borrowing caps on how much parents can borrow to help their students pay for their undergraduate education. And so prior to this bill, many of these programs really allowed students and borrowers to borrow up to the cost of a student's program in order to pay for college. Conveniently, the bill or the new law sets really rigid caps on how much students and families can borrow, but really does nothing to cap how much schools can charge in tuition. And so we know that many aspects of this bill will also really apply even more pressure to state budgets and could result in cuts that would actually increase tuition. And so at a time when we could see tuition increasing at record levels, students and families are going to have less options on the table in order to cover those bills. And what we see and what we are really troubled by is that many students and families are going to have to resort to the private market in order to finance their education. And all of these conversations are happening in real time for families that are trying to think through how they're going to help their kid pay for college in the next academic year. Proponents of the bill have argued that, by reining in student borrowing, it would force schools to lower their costs. But we know that schools across the country can't just overnight with the snap of a finger reduce years and years of tuition increases and inflation, rising costs just generally. And so unfortunately, many students and families are going to have to explore other avenues to cover these funding gaps. And we know that that's going to be more expensive for folks. Just for a quick example, for folks who are exploring lending options in the private market, these loans can cost anywhere between, these loans can have interest rates that can range on average between 10 to 18.5% for low-income borrowers. These loans can literally cost 1.5 times to nearly 3 times as much as some federal undergraduate loans could cost students and families. And so, this new law and all of the changes within the context of federal financial aid programs that students have at their disposal is going to make the conversations on how they're going to pay for college much harder. And as a result, we could see students and families opt to not going to college or taking more time off before they explore their higher education, or going to a much more affordable option because they can't simply afford to pay the bill to go to their dream school. That's not all that the bill does. Not only will it make paying for college much more expensive and risky, it's going to make repaying student loans much more expensive as well. So for new borrowers who are taking on loans after July 1 of next year, all new borrowers will lose access to the full suite of affordable repayment options that borrowers have had at their disposal for years. These borrowers will only have access to kind of two options, both of which are significantly more expensive than all of the other hosts of options that previous borrowers had at their disposal. If the new options are a new kind of standard plan, which allows borrowers to make kind of fixed payments over fixed terms, and then a new repayment assistance plan, which is a new plan that's based on a borrower's income, but requires them to pay significantly higher amounts and requires them to be in repayment for much longer. And so under these plans, we know that borrowers are going to be forced to pay significantly more. We estimate that a typical borrower with a college degree could be forced to pay nearly $3,000 more per year under this new law than compared to what they would have been able to pay under current options available to them. And it's not just new borrowers who are going to see drastically higher student loan costs. Current borrowers as well will be forced out of their current plans after July 1 of 2028 and into more expensive repayment plans moving forward. So on the front end, paying for college is going to get much more expensive and risky. And on the back end, paying off student loans is about to get much more complicated, much harder, and much more expensive.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, this has just been really illuminating, particularly the way in which this bill is just creating this daisy chain of price increases. The impacts on state budgets, then resulting in additional cost increases via tuition increases. I mean, it's just really a perfect storm. So we are running short on time, and I really want to get to our folks who have joined us from the Hill. So I would love to just do a final speed round through these questions. So I'm going to quickly start with Ed, because I think this is a really important one. These SNAP cuts are not just going to impact individuals who use SNAP. They are also going to have a cascade of impacts on local economies, grocers, retailers, food manufacturers, farmers. What can you give us in the 1-minute version of how we're going to see these cuts impact the broader economy and our local communities?
So $187 billion in cuts to individuals and families is $187 billion cuts to local food economies. That's just money not spent in stores or farmers markets or Walmarts or wherever you buy your food. SNAP's one of the best stimuluses for local economies, especially during recessions. It has a ripple effect on jobs and further purchasing, and the entire food system is sort of buoyed by SNAP. I think in rural areas, that's going to be especially pronounced. I think a lot of local food retailers are at high risk of losing a significant part of their income. I mean, the food industry works on very tight margins. It's a 4 or 5% industry for a lot of folks. And if you cut a form of purchase in your store that was 5 or 6%, you're in real trouble. So the impacts will be pretty profound across the board, and will actually impact thousands of jobs, because people will have to change the way that food's sort of distributed in count. I mean, we won't see it upfront and dramatically so, but there'll be adjustments in stores in the way that people purchase food.
Thanks, Ed. Okay, quick over to you, Charles. So I know the Power Lines research has found that 3 in 4 Americans are concerned about rising utility bills. And we find this in our polling over and over again. Utility is really at the top of the heap when it comes to concerns about rising prices. As you mentioned, utilities have already requested this unprecedented amount of money in rate hikes for the year. Can you just say another click on how the bill's effects on the energy tax credits will impact Americans' utility bills?
Yeah, absolutely. So, just to kind of peel back the curtain in terms of what actually goes into your electric bill, right? It's the generation, so the actual production of the energy, and then a lot of it is also the transmission and distribution of that energy from those distant power plants, whether it's a wind farm, a solar farm, a coal plant, a nuclear plant, all the way to your home. And across the board, there's upward pressure on that. And just to also at a point that I didn't mention earlier, part of what makes utility bills such a frustrating expense for a lot of Americans is how much it fluctuates month to month, season to season, and how little visibility there is into how it all works. There's very few other products where you don't really pay for it up front. You don't really know what goes into it. And even when it's visible on your bill, you don't know, what is a fuel adjustment charge or what is a transmission expense? What are all these random things that are going into it? And the reality is that because of the aforementioned broader energy environment that we're in addition to some of these provisions, there's upward pressure on it because the grid is facing unprecedented pressure due to that rising demand scenario, and the repeal of credits that would help put some downward pressure on cost would therefore result in an increase. And, like I mentioned earlier, bills are going to go up. The exact amount will be to be determined, but this is an issue that's not going away and we'll certainly pay very close attention to going forward.
Thanks, Charles. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to our Hill panel really quickly and then come back to Andrea and Aisa in the Q&A because I'm just noticing that almost all the questions that have come in are on healthcare and student debt. So we're going to let you guys tee off then. And now I'm really pleased to introduce our distinguished panel from the Hill. We have Tommy Walker, who is the staff director of the Senate Democratic Steering and Outreach Committee, and Stephanie Palencia, who is the director of outreach for House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries. They have really been leading the charge mightily on the Hill. And with that, I'll turn it over.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll be brief. I know we still have a lot to cover. Stephanie Palencia, Director of Outreach. I work with our partners off the Hill. And we've been doing a lot of great work over the past several months and weeks in the fight against this bill. And while this bill, the Republicans were ultimately able to get it over the finish line, I do feel that we have built a really strong infrastructure that is going to set us on a path for success when it comes to our accountability work, because just because this bill has passed, that doesn't mean our work stops there. Our work to communicate to the American people what the impacts of this bill really, what the impacts are, just begins. And I know a lot of that has been covered on this call. What I want to highlight is a couple of the themes and days of action, mobilization moments that House Democrats are focused on as we step into the August district work period. There's this conception of recess, but really this is going to be a very busy and aggressive moment for us all as we again work on communicating what the impacts of this bill are, and specifically want to highlight a couple of days of action. On Wednesday, July 30th, Medicaid and Medicare Matters Day of Action. Thursday, August 7th, honor our Veterans Day of Action, closely aligned with the PACT Act anniversary. Thursday, August 14th, the Save Social Security Day of Action. That's on a Thursday, aligned with the anniversary of Social Security, but I know that there are events and activations going on into the weekend, specifically into Saturday. And so, we're in a more is more environment, but specifically looking to kick those off on Thursday, August 14th. Week of August 18th, a cost of living week of action, an opportunity to talk about so many of the topics that the panelists have discussed on today's call. The week of August 25th, rewarding hard work week of action. And that's an opportunity for members to engage with their partners in the labor space, especially as we move into Labor Day. And I want to just briefly tease out a couple of other a few other areas we're encouraging our members that aren't explicit in some of the days of action that I outlined. In addition to that, we're obviously encouraging our members to continue the fight when it comes to food assistance and highlight the SNAP cuts, encouraging them to partner in press conferences or to visit local food banks, visit a school and talk about school summer meal programs, right? And continue the drumbeat and accountability work as it relates to SNAP and the fact that Republicans are taking money away or food away from children, families, seniors, veterans, etc. We're encouraging them to hold events related to energy costs. We're also encouraging our members to support our students, our teachers, our schools, and talk about the impacts of what these cuts to education mean. And so wanted to just tease those out a little bit, as I know that they're not, directly highlighted in the specific titles for the days of action, but rest assured that we have a document made available through the House DPCC, which is our messaging infrastructure, and it's a living and breathing document. And so in these resources, we have made available contact information from partner organizations who can provide storytellers, can help with crowd building, can help, put on events locally. And again, we're in a more is more environment. And so, eager and motivated as we move into this August district work period to do the busy work of holding Republicans accountable. So I'll pause there and kick it over to Tommy.
Thanks. I'd echo everything Stephanie said. I think it applies over here in the Senate as well. I'll just highlight a couple of things real briefly. We are going to be joining the House for the August 14th Save Social Security Day of Action and the August 18th through 22nd Cost of Living Week of Action. We're also going to have a Healthcare Day of Action on August 27th, since we'll still be in session when the House is doing theirs. I think from our perspective, it's always great when senators can actually do events on those days, but even if they can't do events, just posting content from previous events, doing a short video, something that's there. And we'll be working very closely with all of our outside partners to make sure that those are being lifted up so we can really just get that sense of momentum going. Like Stephanie said, we'll be sharing the kind of event in a box resources with offices that will have a lot of those same materials. Just two quick other things I would say. We had our weekly steering meeting yesterday, and we had a bunch of polling and messaging experts in. And what the senators heard directly for the folks who were there was this is exactly what we need to be talking about. And there are other things, and I know some of them are shinier and flashier right now, and it's okay to talk about those things too, but we got to come back to this message over and over again. One recommendation was every time you talk about something else, talk about the big, beautiful betrayal twice, so that we can just make sure we're really doing it. And then finally, just to preview, coming this fall through our strike teams, the Senate is going to be doing a series of weekly spotlight forums. So on the impact of the bill across all of the things we've heard about today. So obviously August is important, but we're going to just keep going on this as long as we can.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tommy and Stephanie. And I think they're able to stick around a little bit as well. So if there are questions for either of them, you can throw those in the chat. With that, I'm going to start seeing how many of these questions we can get fielded that came in through our webinar chat. I'm going to start with two questions that came in for Aisa. One is whether or not someone can speak to the prohibition on student loans for higher education programs with low earning outcomes and whether that will impact early childhood and childcare workers. And then the second is students currently on the SAVE plan who are forced to switch to one of the plans under the big bill, lose their time to earned loan forgiveness. I'm hoping you know what that means. Okay.
Yes, two great questions. So the first relates to the provisions in the law that would essentially create new metrics designed to ensure colleges are providing degree programs that leave their graduates earning more than working adults who did not go to college. The law establishes formulas based on graduate level education, graduate level programs and undergraduate level programs, and does not include earnings of folks who did not complete their program. But this is a very, very big change. I know that many in the higher education community and institutions are very concerned about this, because if an institution does not meet this metric or this benchmark for 2 years in a 3-year period, the program could lose access to all federal loans. And so that obviously would have a huge impact on students who are attending these programs currently. They would essentially lose all aspect of Title IV student loans in order to participate in that program. This is very concerning, particularly for traditionally lower wage earning fields, such as education fields, childcare, where there are some, childcare professionals who do not need to go to college, but are still earning wages that could be higher than a specific graduate from a program. So There are a lot of questions about Ed's ability, the Department of Education's ability to implement this, especially with half of its workforce currently still working at the agency. But yes, that is a great question, and it is very concerning. I think we will start to see, hopefully, more details from this administration on how, if at all, they plan to implement this very big new provision. And then the second question with regards to SAVE. So under the new law, borrowers who are currently enrolled in the SAVE plan can remain in their plan until no later than July 1 of 2028. So all current borrowers are essentially, how I've been explaining it to them, is if you're in your repayment plan, you can keep it until July 1, 2028, to which at that point, the secretary will kind of force out all current borrowers into either the new WRAP plan or a new updated income-based repayment plan. How this works out specifically for SAVE is a little different because so many folks, there are roughly 8 million borrowers who are enrolled in this plan, and they have been kind of stuck in a forbearance due to all of the ongoing legal cases that have been filed and lawsuits filed challenging the program. So it is our understanding that the administration is planning on resuming charging of interest on these borrowers. And so I do think that borrowers in the SAVE plan are going to start leaving the SAVE plan and enrolling in this income-based repayment option. Folks who've been on the SAVE plan and might have had other credits, other time spent in other repayment options could very easily transfer that into a separate repayment plan. No problem. But yes, those are the things to remember for folks who are on SAVE. You can stay on SAVE 2028, but it is important to note that August 1st, interest will begin charging. The department is going to begin charging interest on these borrowers starting August 1st. So thinking through those options, unfortunately. And again, another policy change that's only going to increase costs on millions of dollars.
Yeah, thanks so much. We had a question for Tommy in the chat, which he has answered in the chat, around the timeline of some of the strike team investigations and forums that he mentioned. He says schedule for the fall is being built out and will be shared as soon as it's ready. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrea. We've had some lively back and forth in the chat on the healthcare front. But one of the questions that came in was if you could just explain a bit further the loss of the tax credits. Is it with regard to ACA or Medicare or Medicaid? I know it is a little bit complicated on this front because there are so many attacks on healthcare.
Yeah, happy to do that. So the premium tax credits are tax credits that people get to buy ACA marketplace coverage. So this is coverage that you buy through what people traditionally know of as Obamacare. There's like different states have different names if they run their own exchanges. Like in New York, it's the New York State of Health. But if you buy insurance and you don't get it through your job, you probably get it through or Medicare. You're probably getting it through an ACA marketplace plan. The vast majority of people, like over 90% of people who buy their coverage through the ACA marketplace, get a tax credit to help offset the costs of their premiums. Just like when if people who have insurance through their jobs, right? We typically don't pay the full cost of the premium. The employer subsidizes part of it. It works the same way on the ACA marketplace. There was a law passed, and then the American Rescue Plan Act, and then the Inflation Reduction Act, which continued this to enhance the value, the generosity of those tax credits, and to make them available to more people. So before those laws were passed, for example, if you made over 400% of the federal poverty level, which is actually not that much money, you would be ineligible for any help at all, right? Which hit older people pretty hard, right? Like if you're on a fixed income, even if your fixed income is like $60,000 and you're 50 years old, you might have an exceptionally high premium. What the new laws did was not like make insurance free, but cap how much money you might have to pay toward insurance costs, right? So it made sure, those changes made sure that nobody would have to pay more than 8.5% of their income towards the cost of their insurance, right? So you would get a value of a tax credit that would just bring your contribution down to 8.5%. Which was great, right? It solved a cliff that we had that was a problem for a lot of middle income, older Americans in particular. Those enhancements are going to expire at the end of the year. So on December 31st, if nothing changes, if Congress decides it's not going to keep the enhancements going, they will disappear. And we know what that's going to do, right? It's going to jack up premium costs on average, as I shared, by 75%. The Congressional Budget Office, nonpartisan office, that's job is just to advise Congress, puts out data a lot of people don't like on both sides of the political aisle, estimates that once those enhancements go away, over 4 million people are going to lose their coverage because it's not going to be affordable for them. They're not going to be able to buy it. They can't afford it. So we're very worried about that. That will happen starting January 1, right? Because that's when the new insurance year will begin. However, open enrollment starts sooner than that. So people are going to see those jacked up prices in November when they go to enroll in their coverage for next year. But that's what that is in a nutshell. It doesn't impact Medicare. It doesn't impact it's just for the Affordable Care Act marketplaces. There are other bad things in the law that impact other insurance segments, but that's what I meant when I was talking about the premium tax credits.
Thanks. And you've said a couple of times the 75% increase in premium costs. Can you just give us a little bit of a sense of about how much money that is? Is that $5? Is that $100? Is that $700? I know it will vary.
I mean, for some people, it's thousands of dollars. So let me pull up. Sorry, I don't have this at my fingertips, but I can pull up what that might look like. But yeah, no, it can be thousands of dollars, like literally thousands of dollars. And for some people, it could be like over $10,000. Usually that amount is going to increase based on your age and based on your income, because you can be charged more for a marketplace plan, depending on how old you are.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. Question for Charles. You spoke of costs, but does this bill not also further erode the capacity of a woefully outdated electric grid?
Yeah, certainly. So, there's been a lot of talk about all of the above energy approach. And I think it's, from a lot of folks' point of view, we shouldn't leave any type of energy resource on the table, and certainly not some of the energy resources that are the cheapest and quickest to deploy today. And that is definitely implicated by a lot of the tax credit provisions within the bill in terms of both the speed of getting access to those energy resources and the cost. And so going forward, I think, again, this is something that is very much worth paying attention to because electricity demand is rising. And to be able to accommodate that, we're going to need to build and deploy more energy resources. And there are limitations to how much we can get from any one particular type of source, such as gas, due to gas supply chain issues and cost increases. So from that standpoint, in terms of the actual reliability of the grid, that is also very much a concern in addition to the affordability challenges. So that's, we saw a recent example of that in New Orleans, which now in the last 2 months has actually experienced two significant power outages, the first of which knocked 100,000 New Orleanian residents out of power. That's not supposed to happen during the late spring. That may happen during extreme weather event situations or high periods of electricity usage like the late summer, but that was unprecedented. I think it's a harbinger of what could come if we don't get all of these solutions aligned going forward.
Thanks, Charles. So I was going to go to Ed, but I'm now being told that Ed has cleared his entire queue of questions in the chat. So total warrior, Ed. So Andrea, I'm just going to give you the last question here, which is, well, there's a question about metal tier. If we have a breakdown of price by bronze plan, et cetera, maybe we can circulate that after. But I actually think we should end on this one: impact on Medicare, potential impact on Medicare.
Yes, happy to answer that. And I was just putting an example in the chat about what like a family of four making 129,000 might see. But impacts on Medicare, yes. So going back to that, and I'll put in the chat as well an analysis that we've done. But there's a couple of things to note. And I only talked about one earlier, which is that for very low income people on Medicare, who qualify for savings programs that help cover the cost of their premiums, their co-pays, their deductibles, it is going to be harder for them to access those programs now, because a regulation that made it easier and more streamlined is now going to be blocked. As a result, CBO expects more than 1 million people on Medicare, again, very low income people on Medicare, are going to see their out-of-pocket costs spike as a result of the bill. Beyond that, a couple of changes to note with respect to Medicare. One is, as Ed mentioned, related to SNAP, there are now categories of people, legal immigrants, that are no longer going to be eligible for the Medicare program. So, asylees, victims of domestic violence, folks with temporary protected status, folks who are here legally, immigrated here legally. The bill strips them of their eligibility for Medicare, also Medicaid and ACA premium tax credit subsidies. Additionally, and this is a little bit more in the weeds, because of the size of these cuts, unless Congress acts to avert this, we could see a scenario where there's going to be mandatory cuts to payment rates in Medicare. This is, again, it's a little bit technical, but that's because of a law that requires you to pay for things as you go. It's called the Pay Go Act. So, and then there's one other change that I can note. And then this is, again, I love the way that you described this, Lindsay, as like a daisy chain of impacts. Another thing that this bill does is block a rule that would actually require nursing homes, where most people, who are going there on Medicare, Medicaid, to have like at least one, registered nurse on staff for 24 hours. So mandatory nurse staffing ratios. The bill would block those, and that law is not necessarily going to increase costs, maybe, right? But it could cost lives. I mean, we think there's going to be thousands of people who die every year as a result of this. Then there's going to be indirect effects, and then I'm going to stop talking. So even though this question is about Medicare, again, many people on Medicare rely on skilled nursing facilities. They rely on nursing home care, which Medicare primarily does not pay for. That is paid for by Medicaid. And people who have Medicare often also have Medicaid if they have nursing home needs, and Medicaid is what's paying for those. States are now going to see massive hits to federal Medicaid dollars that are coming into their state budgets. There are many Medicare services that states are not required to cover, right? They're optional benefits, including home and community-based supports, adult dental. I mean, there's many of those things. And we know, because we've seen this happen in the past, when states face a shock to their Medicaid budgets, they start to cut. I mean, there's very few things you can do. You can raise taxes, you can cut benefits, you can cut rates, you can cut your rolls. But we see that they often cut optional Medicaid services. So even though it's not a direct like attack on Medicare in that way, if a state is all of a sudden no longer supporting home and community-based supports for Medicare enrollees who are on Medicaid who rely on them, that's also going to impact many people on that program. So this is convoluted, but it's really, really critical.
Thanks so much, Andrea. And thank you everyone for joining us today, everyone in the audience, all of our speakers. Thanks so much for coming from the Hill, Tommy and Stephanie. For our policy experts, I mean, I will say, I would guess that all of the policy experts learned something today from one of the other policy experts, and that is because the provisions in this bill are just so vast. I mean, it really takes your breath away, the damage this bill will wreak to our healthcare, to our energy costs, to our education system, to our food system. Hopefully we've armed you with some good information today that you can take into the summer to really get the word out about how terrible this bill is, and hopes that we'll have a chance of fixing it in the relatively near future. Okay, with that, I'll say thank you to everyone. Really appreciate your time, and keep an eye out for resources that will circulate and follow up to folks who were able to attend or who registered and weren't able to attend as well. Okay, thanks everyone.